You need to write a research question for your case study, and you're going to learn how right now. Hi, everybody. I'm Leigh Hall from teachingacademia.com, and I'm all about giving you the tools you need to navigate academia and make your best impact. Today, we're going to be talking about how you write a research question for a case study. So let's get to it. All right, so before you start, before you write that research question, you've got to do some preliminary work. You have to understand the problem that it is that you want to examine, which means you've got to be really familiar with the literature on that problem and what we do know and where the gaps are, right? So that you can design the best research question possible that's going to fill in those gaps, right? Think about what you want to study, what you want to learn, what is that issue that's really exciting you the most, okay? And then start to play around with the idea of, is this going to be a single case or is this going to be a multi-case design, right? Are you looking at one person or one community or one event? Or are you looking at multiple people, multiple communities, multiple events, right? And you may not know that entirely yet. You may flesh that out a little bit, but if you can get a good handle on that, that's going to help you as you go into writing your research question as well. Think about the context that you want to collect this data in. So I often collect my data in schools. Okay, but are you collecting it online, right? Are you collecting it inside an online community? Are you going to a specific city? Are you going to a specific organization? What is the context? Because that can also feed into how you word your research question, all right? And then are you documenting the effects of an intervention? So one of the things to think about with case studies is sometimes we do case studies in and of themselves, and other times we are designing an intervention, and then within that, we are going to do a case study, like a close-up case study within that intervention as well. So are you doing that? Okay, so those are things to get clear on before you write your research question. Now, here are some examples. I've done a lot of case study work. I've done a lot of mixed methods work, and I've done a lot of interventions that have case studies embedded within them. So I've pulled here for you 3 examples that all come from my own work, all right? So the first question here, why do youth and adults read digital interactive text found in Delight Games, okay? And in this, Delight Games is an interactive fiction app, okay? You can download it if you want. I have no part in it. But really, it was really popular. And what I wanted to do was, and this actually didn't start off as case study research, right? It started off with survey research. But then what I wanted to do was identify some youth and adults that, answered and responded in particular ways on their surveys and really hone in on getting more, interviews, more close-up information about them and studying a subset in depth to learn more about what motivated them to really read on this app. The second one started off, this is really a good example of a case study embedded within an intervention. How do 5 focal students with varying reading abilities talk about text within the context of the instruction they receive? So I did this study in 8th grade English language arts class, and the teacher was providing some instruction that was supposed to help all students get better with their abilities to read and talk about text in that English class. And what I did was I said, okay, fine, I'm gonna, be collecting information on the whole class. I want to see how this intervention affects their abilities, right, to read, and how it affects their reading comprehension scores. But then I also said, I really want to look at 5 students closely. Okay, so I looked at 5 students who varied in terms of where they fell on the continuum as readers to see, how is it that, what do your scores look like? And when I talked to you, I interviewed them each 3 times. What are you thinking about what's going on in the class? I had them talk about their work samples, and then I targeted them. Everybody was observed once, sometimes twice a week in the context of that instruction to see how are they responding to it? Are they participating more or less? Does the way that they talk about text change over time? Okay, so that was a multi-case study. And then the last one was really a descriptive case study. And it was just a straight case study. There was no intervention or anything else here. How does a middle school student engage with text in school? And so really what I was doing was, I found, and actually a middle school student with reading difficulties is what that should say, engage with text in school, because I was looking for an adolescent that had some academic reading difficulties. And then within that, I'm observing that student 2 to 3 times a week. I interviewed her 3 times a year. I collected lots of artifacts on her. Obviously, like I documented when she was presented with text to read, how she responded to reading them. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I got with those observations for that third example was being able to demonstrate patterns of how that student, when given something to read, right, what did she do in response to that? All right, so when it comes time to write your question, you have to just commit to the fact that you're going to write some crappy drafts, all right? You're going to be drafting, all right? You want to write multiple versions of your question. You want to play around with it. You want to think about the following things. When you know what the problem is that you want to study, does your research question address all of those elements, okay? Are they all captured there? So, for example, if I go back, right, when I put in question 3, how does a middle school student engage with text in school? As I was talking, I was like, well, really, that should say, how does a middle school student with academic reading difficulties? Because I knew that it was a particular kind of student that I wanted to be in that case study. So does your question capture all the important elements, right? If it doesn't, then fix it, right? Is anything unclear? So with my previous example, when I said, you know, how's a middle school student respond to reading text in school? Any middle school student, right? Does it matter if the student's male? Does it matter if the student's female? What's important? Okay, so were some things in there that were unclear, and obviously things that had been left out, right? Elements that I needed to provide to make the question better and more concise, okay? And you won't necessarily see that right away. So you want to draft a few versions, you know, go home, you know, take a day or two off, come back and look at it, okay? And then you'll be able to start seeing the issue and start tweaking it. And then is it too wordy? Because while you do want all the elements of your study in there, you also don't want to go so overboard that your question is excessively wordy. You just want, you know, the main points that are in there. So I have it, you know, another example here. When you think about drafting, we have, why do people read text online? And that's a nice starter question, okay? You know, but what do I mean by people? Okay, anybody, right? Does it matter, right? It probably does matter, okay? When I say read text online, any text, right? When I say online, do I mean anywhere online? Okay, so it's a nice starter question. It gets the conversation going. Like somebody could sit down, look at that question, and then have a conversation with me and ask me, sort of poke at it and ask me things that I just said, right? Like when I say people, I mean anybody. And you can see from what I wrote above it that's in italics, I don't just mean anybody. I mean youth and adults, and I'm using youth. And I don't explain this in the question, but I explained it in the paper. To be teens, ages 13 and up, really. Okay, so youth and adults. I want to know for text, I wanted to know why they read digital interactive text. And when I say online, really, I mean in that Delight Games app that I had talked about earlier, okay? So I don't just mean anybody reading any text anywhere on the internet. I want to know why teenagers and adults, why they are reading these digital interactive texts that are found inside this particular app. So now it's not overly wordy. It's got all the important elements. If I need another question, I can ask another question. But for this question in and of itself, it looks really quite good. It captures all those elements. All right, so that's how you think about drafting and ultimately getting to the question that's going to help you do your case study research. So if you like this video, want to see more, head on over, and I will see you in the next one.